Noah, when we ask the question, how would you know whether you were saved? You put, I don't know. Why did you put that?
I believe because it's not my choice. I'm not the one who decides whether I go to heaven or not. It's the Father's choice. So, unless he tells me I'm being saved before I make it, that's the only way I would know. I don't know because it's his choice.
Noah, were you raised in any type of religious home?
Yes.
What was that?
Hebrew Israelite.
Hebrew Israelites. Would you hold to that view today?
Correct. I do. Yes.
Okay. So, Noah, let's be honest. How familiar are you with the Hebrew Israelites? Or is it just something, a cultural thing that you grabbed onto?
Less of a cultural thing. It's not a cultural thing at all. It's more of a belief.
Let's take a look at some basic beliefs about the black Hebrew Israelites. This ideology goes back to the early 1800s. The movement picked up steam in the 1960s during the Civil Rights era. Their religious beliefs vary from group to group within the movement. They claim they're the true descendants of biblical Israel. Gentiles equates to white Europeans. Righteousness is achieved by law-keeping and strict Sabbath-keeping. Jesus, whose real name is Yeshua, was a black man. Many believe you must refer to God as Yah. And most deny the Trinity and the deity of Christ. Now, these two highlighted points clearly show that this movement should be considered a religious cult by Christians. What do they believe about Jesus?
That his name is in Jesus is Yeshua.
Okay.
The way, like, an example, his name, Jesus. How could his name be Jesus if no letter, the J didn't exist in any language before 1512, so how could his name be Jesus?
Changing the language of a word does not affect the meaning of the word. For example, the English word hotel. Hotel in Japanese is hoteru. Because the Japanese language does not have any L sounds in it, they drop the L and use the next closest sound, and they choose ru. The language changes, but the object itself does not. Hotel is still a hotel in English-speaking countries or in Japan. Juliet tells Romeo, that which we call a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Juliet compares Romeo to a rose, saying that if he were not named Romeo, he would still be handsome and be her love. In the same way, we can refer to the Son of God as Jesus in English, Yeshua or Joshua in Hebrew, or Jesus in Greek. In any language, his name always means the same. The Lord is salvation.
The image that we see as Jesus, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed man with the long locks, who's that?
There's a group called the Hebrew Israelites that believe that Jesus was black. But they also believe that Jesus came to earth only to save people of black descent. Well, I've been researching this question for over 2 years, and there's a few things I'd like you to consider. It is an indisputable fact that Jesus was a Jew who lived in the Middle East. Jesus' ancestors included Abraham and David, men who also lived in the Middle East. So what did the Jews of the Middle East look like 2,000 years ago? Experts in anthropology would say that the Jews of Jesus' time likely resemble what Iraqi Jews look like today. This means that Jesus' skin was probably not white like most Europeans, and probably not black like most Africans below the equator. His skin color was probably some shade of brown. If someone claims to know Jesus' skin color for sure, it's nothing more than speculation. So why are there so many different versions of Jesus? Since nobody knows what Jesus looked like, people have had to draw based off of what they imagine Jesus to look like. Different cultures would often depict Jesus to look like themselves. For example, many Europeans painted Jesus like this. But over in Asia, you may have seen a picture that looked like this. Does God really want us to focus on Jesus' color when we imagine him and depict him in art and culture? In the Bible, God has included everything we need to know to live a godly life. If God wanted us to focus on the color of his skin, perhaps there would have been more mention of it in the Bible, but it's just not there.
Jesus died on the cross, right?
I don't believe it was a cross. I believe he was hung, but that's not as important, I guess.
Raised from the dead.
Mm-hmm.
All right. How familiar are you with the Bible, Noah?
I'd say I'm pretty familiar. I'm in the process right now of reading the whole thing, Old Testament, New Testament. I'm in the book of Judges currently.
So when Paul says in Galatians chapter 6 that he doesn't brag on anything but the cross, you say he doesn't brag on anything but the cross of Christ. But you're saying you don't believe in the cross? The very thing that Paul said, that's the thing that he only brags about?
Yeah, I don't believe he died on a cross.
The word in the Bible translated cross is staros. While this can mean a pole or a cross, the most logical translation is cross for these reasons. In Matthew 27:38, we read where Jesus was crucified with his arms outstretched, with the two thieves, one at his right and one at his left. His arms would have to be outstretched on a cross for the thieves to be on his right and left. In Matthew 27:37, we read, over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." If the Hebrew Israelite belief that Jesus was hung on a pole instead of a cross is true, shouldn't it read they posted above his hands the charge against him instead of over his head? Archaeologists have excavated a first-century Roman city, finding an outline of a cross preserved on the wall of a home. Unbelievers will always find something about Christianity to attack. That's why unbelievers mock the cross as foolishness, and many walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. In the case of Noah, I think he's simply not thought this through and is parroting what he has been taught. How could you believe that? History says it is. It was that way.
That's a question I would have to answer later because I need to educate myself more on that. Yeah.
Okay. The Bible, of course, has eyewitnesses that said that he died on the cross.
Really?
Of course we do. John, his disciple, was right there at the cross. Mary was there at the cross. We have eyewitnesses. So why would you not believe that he died on the cross? What I would contend, Noah, is you have accepted a cultural thing. You haven't accepted a biblical thing.
I wouldn't say that. Cultural? No. Okay. I do accept the biblical thing because
Then you would believe that he died on the cross because that's what it says.
you're nitpicking like little things right now. I'm more so like my belief is things like I don't celebrate Christmas. Do you celebrate Christmas?
Yes, I do.
You believe that's his birthday?
No, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because we're celebrating what Jesus did, his birth, his death, and his resurrection. That's what we're celebrating when we celebrate Christmas. Jesus coming in the flesh, the God-man coming in the flesh. You don't believe Jesus is God, do you?
No. Well, no.
See, now Jesus said in John 8:24, he's talking to the Jews, and he says, if you don't believe that I am, you will die in your sins. So let's use some Greek here, all right? Do you know what I am in the Greek means?
No, sir.
So if we go back to the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, in Exodus chapter 3, God calls himself I am, ego I me. That's the Greek. Jesus used ego I me several times about himself. He said, if you don't believe that I am, you will die in your sins. In John chapter 8, verse 58, he said, before Abraham was born, I am, ego I me. And so Jesus identified himself as ego I me, as God in human flesh. So if you want to talk about language, that's what Jesus identified himself as.
As God?
As God, absolutely.
That's some great knowledge.
Yeah.
But
you see, Noah, this is very important. This is why I'm very, very concerned for you. It's because, remember in John 8:24, Jesus said, if you don't believe that I am, ego I me, you will die in your sins. And so if you're denying that Jesus is God, Jesus says, Noah, you're going to die in your sins because you're denying who Jesus himself is. That's pretty serious stuff, isn't it?
I have a lot to say, but time is a thing.